before I actually make this video, I just want to give a bit of a disclaimer, okay? I'm not actually criticizing Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier. I think both of them are huge credit to the sport. I think obviously Justin Gaethje brings a lot of excitement to the sport, and he's been in several Fight of the Year candidates, like from Michael Chandler versus obviously Michael Chandler versus Justin Gaethje, to all of obviously fighting Poirier as well in the past. He's been in several barn burner fights that have been incredibly fun to watch. Even his fights against Eddie Alvarez that not that many people mention. All of these fights have been incredible to watch. Even though he beat one of my favourite fighters in Tony Ferguson, you can legitimately say that Justin Gaethje is one of the most exciting fighters in the sport. And then you got Dustin Poirier, and Dustin Poirier has literally fought everyone from Max Holloway to Conor McGregor twice to several top fighters, and he's beaten them, including obviously Justin Gaethje himself. So both of them, in my opinion, are legit top fighters, right? But I'll be honest with you, even though Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje 2 is an incredible fight, and their first fight was incredible as well, I don't think it's a BMF fight. I think it's a great fight. I think both of them are warriors, but I don't think it's a BMF fight. Now, what you need to understand is, what does BMF actually mean? Like, I'm not going to say it because of a YouTube censorship, but the baddest MF belt is not about you being a top scrapper in the sport. It's not about that. What it is about, what it represents, is the fighters that are anti-establishment, anti-hero type fighters. So when you think about anti-hero, like there's certain, like if you look at fighting games, there's certain characters that are really popular even though they're not the hero. Now, example of that is Akuma. Akuma is a fighter that he's an anti-establishment, anti-hero type fighter. He's not one of the good guys, but he's got an incredible fan following. Another example, if we're going to use Street Fighter, is Evil Ryu. So these are like characters that they don't have the archetype of being like a traditional hero, if you were looking at it from that point of view, okay? So basically, the BMF is about the anti-establishment, anti-hero type fighters that are fighting each other, okay? Now, if you look at the original BMF fight, who was it? It was Jorge Masvidal and it was Nate Diaz. Both of them represent that. Both of them represent that to the fullest. These were fighters that carved out their own niche. These were fighters that were not corporatized, in the sense that they were not fighters that were like that did exactly what the UFC brass wanted. These were fighters that were that rode to the beat of their own drums, and because of that, they got a lot of respect from the fans, and they were fighters that were anti-establishment, in the sense that they followed their own path. They were not like the Conor McGregors, the GSPs of the world. They're very great fighters. They're all-time great, legendary, GOAT type status fighters. Not Conor McGregor, but you get what I mean. They're fighters that are loved by the masses, right? But what I would say is they're not BMF fighters. They're not BMF fighters, right? Now, I feel like the UFC, obviously they're using it as a market employ, but generally the UFC have in a weird way watered down what BMF is. BMF is about anti-establishment, so you can argue that Francis Ngannou is a BMF fighter. This is a guy that came from the sand mines of Cameroon, went on to become UFC gold, then put his middle finger up at the UFC and said to them, listen, I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to be anti-establishment, and I'm going to get a boxing fight that's going to give me 10 times what you lot paid me. And he went off and did it. He's a true BMF, okay? He's an anti-establishment, anti-hero guy that goes by the beat of his own drum. Now, Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier are not BMFs. They're not anti-establishment. In fact, they're very pro-establishment. They follow the trajectory of other fighters. In fact, they're to some extent, they're not on the same level as a Conor McGregor, but they do get preferential treatment from the UFC. What was BMF was the likes of a Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz was not getting preferential treatment from the UFC. They did not look at him like he was the go-to guy they're going to market. It was famously said that Nate Diaz was only paid $40,000 for the Michael Johnson fight. That shows you he was not BMF. Right, Conor McGregor, despite his image and the way he tries to act like a bad boy, he's not a BMF. He was getting preferential treatment from the UFC. Michael Chandler, even though he was a great fighter, he's not a BMF. He was, again, getting preferential treatment from the UFC. A fighter that's BMF is, I would say, I'll put Tony Ferguson in there. He's a BMF fighter. And I'll say obviously Nate Diaz, Nick Diaz, Francis Ngannou, again anti-establishment. Another fighter that's a lot of people troll him, but he's definitely a BMF, is Tito Ortiz. And another fighter, Randy Couture, he's a BMF. These are fighters that were anti-establishment, that went against the norm, that spoke out against the UFC. And obviously generally the UFC doesn't reward that behavior. But if we were looking at a true BMF, they're BMFs. Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, they're not BMFs. They're great fighters, they're very fun fighters to watch, but they're not BMF fighters. I just wanted to put that out there because I feel like the name is getting watered down now. So that's just my opinion. Tell me what you think. Do you think the Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje fight is a BMF fight? I don't think it is. I don't think it is a BMF fight. What the BMF belt is supposed to represent is the anti-establishment fighters that the UFC did not push, but somehow caught the heart of the people, and that everybody loves to watch. That represents Jorge Masvidal. That represents Nate Diaz. These were the people's champs. These were not the champs that the UFC gave preferential treatment to that became the champs. These were the people champs. Tony Ferguson represents that. Randy Couture represents that. Tito Ortiz represents that. GSP does not represent that. Anderson Silva does not represent that. Conor McGregor does not represent that. So that's just my opinion. Tell me your opinion. Do you think the UFC have watered down the BMF name, or do you think what I'm saying is complete nonsense and this is a BMF fight? I think it's a great fight. I think both of them are great fighters. I think they're warriors, but I don't think they're BMF. They're not anti-establishment. How many times has Justin Gaethje or Dustin Poirier spoken out against the UFC? Now compare that to how many times Nate Diaz has headbutted against the UFC about not getting paid enough, and they were still loved by the fans. And obviously after he beat Conor McGregor, his stock went through the roof. So you tell me, when you got a fighter like Nate Diaz who beat the golden cash cow, who was getting so much preferential treatment in Conor McGregor, and he was the underdog who had to take that fight on 12 weeks notice, who was underpaid in the Michael Johnson fight, and then he went on and beat the massive cash cow Conor McGregor. He's a BMF. Dustin Poirier and Justin Gaethje, they're great fighters, they're warriors, but they're not BMF fighters. So tell me what you think below. Another example is obviously Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal was in obscurity and was not getting pushed by the UFC for the past 16 years, and then out of nowhere he beat a golden goose in Ben Askren. He beat Nate Diaz, which is a huge win, and he managed to accomplish a lot of great things. And then he legitimately was a BMF because he won the BMF title. So that's just my opinion. Tell me your opinion. What do you think about what I'm saying? Another fighter that is who was on the cusp of being a BMF fighter was Colby Covington. He was anti-establishment. He spoke out against the UFC, but now I feel like he's less of a BMF now because he's getting preferential treatment because he's going to get the title shot, which he doesn't deserve. So you tell me what you think. Do you think what I'm saying is true, or do you think what I'm saying is a lie? I feel like the BMF champion to some extent is the people champion. He's the guy that the fans love, but the UFC to some extent hates. That's my opinion. Tell me your opinion, and like and subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot more content coming your way. Peace.